Hey World History, I hope you guys are keeping yourselves safe and also busy from being quarantined. And I also want to let you guys know that you have done a phenomenal job of adapting and going kind of with the changes and going with the flow during this crazy, crazy time. So keep it up. I also figured to kind of help you out, we would be going over this. So I'll read it and you can follow along on your laptop or listen because then you do have a worksheet that goes along with this. But I'll do a favor and I'll help you read it. So, in case you don't know yet, Africa was kind of controlled by Belgium and Portugal and Spain and Britain. We know Europe and Great Britain or England specifically loved trying to take over different countries. But with Africa, a bunch of different countries in Europe were controlling them, and they were kind of like their colonies. But as we know before, and as we've seen in world history several thousand times already, you have colonies that are controlled by another country, and they want to break away and be independent. So, without further ado, we'll start this. So, during the late 19th century, European powers divided Africa and its resources into political partitions at the Berlin Conference. So basically, broke Africa all up and then gave them to different countries. By 1905, Africa was almost completely controlled by European countries. The two exceptions were Liberia, which had been settled by African American former slaves, and Ethiopia, which successfully resisted colonization by Italy. Britain and France had the largest amount of control in Africa, but Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Portugal also had colonies. Africa suffered from long-term effects as a result of the colonialism and the imperialism. So, in other words, being controlled by European countries or countries in Europe wasn't working. People were not being treated fairly. There was poverty, poor conditions were just horrible in all ways, shape, and form. Okay. So one negative effect was the loss of important natural resources like gold and rubber. The countries were devastated economically, so losing money. Europeans went into Africa and tried to make the natives just like they were, or what they considered civilized, also known as the white man's burden. In other words, these leaders or these people who came from Italy, Spain, Portugal, Belgium were coming into Africa and trying to make the people who already lived in Africa like European citizens, or speak the language of whatever European country came in, act the certain ways, have the manners, have the interactions as they would if they were living in that European country. When European leaders divided Africa, they did not take into account the natives' cultural beliefs or rivalries among tribes. This led to conflict among many nations. So, if you were to have, say, a tribe over here, like in this little area, but then you split it up, and you have half the tribe in one controlled by one country, and you have half the tribe controlled by another country, and this tribe's fighting with that tribe, and that tribe was fighting with this tribe, you're mixing up all of these different people, all of these people who had that close-knit group, and might have a problem with that other tribe, then you have more rivalry, you have more fighting, because now they're controlled by the same people. So think of like a family being all split up, and then think about your enemies or your friends, and then not seeing them, but you having a beef with someone else. It's crazy. Okay, so during World War II, the African colonies helped the ruling European nations fight their enemies. Despite this, there was no promise of independence for African nations. There was a shortage of raw materials during the war because Japan conquered many areas where items had previously been found. Africa compensated for this shortage, which was beneficial to them. European nations used the help of African colonies gave them, but saw no reason to reward them with independence after the war. They still saw their African colonies as children and immature, only introducing democratic governments on local levels. So you see this whole idea of democratic government coming in. So the problems. So you have problem one. When the European nations had set their boundaries, they did not take into account the ethnic groups involved. They created situations that led to conflicts. Again, if you have two different tribes, say, or groups who are now forced to live with each other, you're obviously going to have conflict. You're going to have someone who, does something one way, someone does something another way. There's an issue. You're going to butt heads. In addition to that, add on the top that you now have another European country trying to control you and rule you. Sorry, guys. So it's going to cause so many problems on so many different levels. Problem 2, the economies of African nations had been geared towards colonial goals. So Europeans did not create mature and stable economies. These newly independent countries had weak economies, typically geared towards one industry intended to be exported. Okay, that's good. So say it's lumber. So you're cutting down all these trees. Well, that's going this way. What's going to happen when all that tree or that lumber is gone? What's going to happen to your economy? How are you going to pay? How are you going to buy things? How's trading supposed to be done? It's not. It's going to be non-existent. Problem 3. There was a lack of educated citizens to take over running the government and the economy of African nations. Colonizers did not care about educating Africans because they had little need for highly educated people. Once African nations became independent, not enough Africans had been educated or trained well enough to take over the major government positions. So you have this government that's kind of forcing its way in, and now you are being forced basically to follow the government and act as a citizen under the government. And the European citizens or the European people who came over here to kind of run that government really don't care about who lives here. It doesn't matter. We don't need to train them. We don't need to teach them because we're running it. What's the point? So that's great, but when you get your own independence, you then need to set up your own government. Think about what happened in America. We didn't like the monarchy, so we had the American Revolution. We got our independence, but then we had to set up a new sort of government. Well, there's a problem there because the individuals who were in Africa who led the fighting and got the independence really didn't know the ins and outs of what a successful government consisted of. So it's going to be a lot of that trial and error as they try to build up this government. Okay, so that is this reading. And you guys have a worksheet to do with that. Okay, so like I said, guys, thank you so much for adapting to this crazy time and making it work and going with the flow. I love you all. I miss you all. And I hope to see you guys really, really soon.